So let's have a little chat, shall we? Let's have a little brief chat. This is your host, the Occult View. Mm, Eating some orange sherbet with an apple cereal bar mixed in it. I don't really eat cookies and stuff, so this is healthier. But anyway, let's have a chat. There's a whole lot of shit going on in the LGBT community. And and I'm gonna give my commentary on some things that are taking place here on these YouTube streets in the trans and LGBT community. Let me start off by saying this ain't personal for me because I don't know any of the parties that are involved. I'm gonna try not to curse in this video, but I don't know any of the parties that are involved. I don't really watch any of them. I'm not subscribed to any of them. But I can't say, I take that back. I do watch, but I only watch when there's some interesting things popping off like it is now. And one thing about it, even though this is all about mess, it does open up the gateway for a deeper conversation about LGBT and trans issues. Okay, well, LGBT issues in general. Okay, so let's get to the commentary, child. So Tasha K T.S. Madison, Mrs. Netta, and Charles are all beefing right now. Well, let me break it down. Tasha K is beefing with T.S. Madison. They've been beefing for the past couple of years, ever since the Just Hilarious situation. And now Tasha K is beefing with Just Hilarious too, which is hilarious, by the way. That is hilarious. Okay. But anyway, so to make a long story short, from what I gather, T.S. Madison, the guy, well, let me back up. What's his name? What's his name? The gay guy that be on there with T.S. Madison. He had some things to say about Miss Netta, and I think Charles too. And Miss Netta didn't like that. Whatever that I think his name is it Craig? Is that his name, Craig? I don't want to get the guy's name wrong, but I think his name is Craig. He had some things to say about Mrs. Netta and Charles. They were not too flattering and they were not too nice. And finally, Mrs. Netta got tired of it and responded. T.S. Madison was really not trying to get into that mess. But see, T.S. Madison does not have anyone advising her properly on a spiritual level. Maybe her mother probably is the one that is advising her more than anything else. And she's probably not listening to what her mother's telling her. Because if I was advising T.S. Madison, I would have told T.S. Madison, Do not respond. If you got to respond, make sure you do not respond with anger or bitterness. See, I would have told T.S. Madison that you should not be responding to Netta and Charles. But what ended up happening was there were some comments that Mrs. Netta looked more feminine than T.S. Madison, meaning looking more, womanly. And T.S. Madison didn't like that. And I think that is what she wanted to address. I'm being nice, so I'm going to call people what they want to be called. Okay? After T.S. Madison responded to that and responded to the comments that her co-host, Craig, was saying about Mrs. Netta and Charles, there was an avalanche of a response. T.S. Madison has now been accused of being transphobic against other trans people. T.S. Madison has been accused of, talking, very reckless and just coming down on Mrs. Netta and Charles. And the biggest one is people are now saying that T.S. Madison is jealous of Netta and Charles. Here's where T.S. Madison made the mistake. You did not, or she did not, see that this was a setup. They set you up, girl. They set you up. Because I would have told you to tell Craig, or whatever his name is, no disrespect, but I would have told you to tell Craig, y'all could have had a behind the scenes conversation. You probably did, but I would have reiterated it. Tell Craig, do not talk about Mrs. Netta and Charles in a negative way on my platform or on our platform, because negative publicity is good publicity for people who are trying to come up. And Charles and Mrs. Netta, they're trying to come up. And they have people who are on the sidelines, Tasha K, who inadvertently, allegedly, are supporting them in coming up because they want to take T.S. Madison out of that spot. Now, people can say whatever they want about T.S. Madison, and this is no shade to Mrs. Netta or Charles, but people can say whatever they want to about T.S. Madison, but T.S. Madison has made a name for herself. And no matter what differences she may have with Tasha K, no one can deny that T.S. Madison has made some pretty good accomplishments coming from where she came from. So no one can deny that. But this was a setup. And I'm not a T.S. Madison fan. I'm not a Tasha K fan. I'm not a Miss Netta fan. I don't like none of them. So this is coming from a totally unbiased opinion and perspective. T.S. Madison should have never came down off of her echelon and responded to a Mrs. Netta and Charles. Remember what I told you all about peace, be still? Sometimes silence is the best defense. Because now what has happened is T.S. Madison is being accused of being transphobic. T.S. Madison is now being accused of hating children, hating women. Here we go again. All because it all leads back to T.S. Madison responding to Mrs. Netta. Now, if I was T.S. Madison, I would have simply said this: I have nothing but respect and love for Mrs. Netta and Charles, and I wish them the best and the most success possible. That's what I would have said, even if I felt otherwise. Because remember, you are the bigger name. You are the rich bitch, remember? I know I said I wasn't going to cuss, but according to you, you're rich. So if you're all of these things and you said that Mrs. Netta's name is not in the rooms that you sit in, then why would you jeopardize your brand, your name, your success to get down in the gutter with people that I'm not saying that, by the way, I'm not saying that Charles and Mrs. Netta are in the gutter. I'm not saying that. But why would you jeopardize all of the things you have going for you just to respond to a Mrs. Netta and Charles? Who are trying to get to the level that you're at. Why? So, child, Tasha K, she picked up the story, right? And she gave her 2 cents. And honey, all hell done broke loose. After Tasha K gave her 2 cents, T.S. Madison came back with a vengeance and dragged Tasha K and her son. That's where the problem lies. That's where the problem lies. And see, this is not the first time that T.S. Madison has dragged her son, but let me tell you what happened. See, Tasha K is a Pisces. Pisces are very vindictive people, especially the women. They are very vindictive people. T.S. Madison is a Libra, and Libras can be vindictive as well. But the problem with Libras is that some of you stay so far up in the air, like your head is so up in the air because you're an air sign, and you stay so full of heat and passion that you're so arrogant you don't pay attention to what's going on in the water. You're supposed to wade in the water, but you ignore it because you're fire and you're air, allegedly. You're so up in the air on your throne, nothing can touch me. I'm air and I'm this and I'm that. But you're not paying attention to the movements that's going on in the earth and in the water with the Pisces. Pisces are very vindictive. Just like Geminis are very vindictive. And Pisces and Gemini actually, and somebody confirmed this for me, a spiritual constituent, she confirmed this for me, that Pisces and Gemini are sometimes intertwined. This has been in the making, my own spiritual perspective, for a very long time. Why do you think Mrs. Netta and Charles is not really saying anything? I think Mrs. Netta addressed Craig, the man who sits on the panel with Madison as a co-host. I think Mrs. Netta addressed him one time. But don't you find it strange that Mrs. Netta is not saying anything hardly about this? Mrs. Netta hasn't even addressed Tasha K. Now, T.S. Madison said that no one would ever be able to take her off her throne. Baby, they're trying to take you off your throne, whatever that may mean for you. They're coming for your crown. They're coming for it. And it looks like they may get it. And you handed it to them. You know how you handed it to them? Number one, by even addressing it. And number two, by prolonging it. And number three, by talking about Tasha K's son. You don't talk about nobody's child. You know how black women feel about that. And black women are your main supporters. And everywhere I go on YouTube where people are talking about it, people are saying, I like T.S. Madison. I really love and like her. But I cannot condone her talking about Tasha K's son like that. T.S. Madison said some very, very horrible things about Tasha K's son and horrible things about children in general. That she don't give a F about children. I don't give a F about your children. F, just speaking very derogatory about children. Go back and look at the live. These are not things I'm making up. I understand the context of which she was speaking, but the connotation in and of itself and how T.S. Madison was speaking about children, that really makes you look bad. Even if that's how you really feel, you should not put that out there to the universe when you have a brand. And we're not going to sit here and pretend like black women did not help you, including your mother, build your brand to where it's at, or at least support you in building your brand and your name. Because they're not, we're the straight men. They're not around helping to build you up. It's black women who have made you the success in a way that you are now. From their support, from their cash apps and their money as well. And now you have the unmitigated gall to basically say, fuck you bitches. I'm in Hollywood now. Let me tell you something. Hollywood is not a very welcoming place for black or white or trans women or trans people in general. Look at what they did to June Mack. Look at what they did to Angelica Ross. Where is Laverne Cox these days? This is no hatred, but I think that T.S. Madison went about this all wrong. She should have never addressed the likes of a Mrs. Netta or Charles, because they're trying to come up. And hey, I'm not knocking them at all. I ain't knocking none of them. I don't like none of them because I don't know them. And I don't really, I don't rock with them. So this is not coming from a place of hatred. I'm coming from a place of observation. And then you get into this back and forth with Tasha K, who is a much more powerful player in this game. Just look at her numbers. And that's not because I like her. I'm looking at her numbers. And then, even though women will say they don't like her, the one thing that will bond them together is that they are mothers and have children. Tasha K has several children. And you're talking about her son like that? When you have a brand. You have a name brand. You have a name for yourself. Do you know how many sponsors have children who will take offense to the things that you've said? So now what's happening, there's a lot of backlash. And now they're pulling now the very thing that T.S. Madison has been fighting against, transphobia. Now they're using that to classify you as being someone that's transphobic against other trans women in the community. And now added on top of that, now you look like a person that hates women and children. And I'm not saying that this is true. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you made a mistake when you addressed Mrs. Netta and when you addressed Charles. T.S. Madison should have never addressed Charles and Mrs. Netta. That was a big mistake to do that because it was a setup all from the beginning. It was a setup. They knew by talking about you or that guy that you have on the panel, he may have been in on it. Who knows? That's why you should have kept Kaya. But you wanted to go to Hollywood. And I know T.S. Madison is always talking about, she has all this money and all this stuff and she's rich and all that. I get it, got it. But you're rich today in Hollywood and tomorrow you're in the soup line. That's how it works. You were throwing spells and curses at Tasha K's son. I understand you throwing them at her. I get it. Throw them at her. I get that. I got it. But why would you throw spell work and curses at her son? Because her son can't get with you the way an adult can. So when I hear people say, well, Tasha K talked about his mother, Miss Mary. Yes, she did. But Miss Mary is an adult. So Miss Mary can come back at her. What T.S. Madison should have did was, instead of mentioning her son, the commentary that you were giving on her mother, the clapback that you gave on her mother, on Tasha K's mother, that was a lot more interesting than you talking about her defenseless son. So now, even the women that supported you, they're looking at you with the side eye because you're talking about a mother and her child. And even the women that support you, that have children, they feel a ways about that now. So you kind of defeated your own purpose. You're an activist who fights against homophobia and transphobia, but now because of the things you said about Mrs. Netta, now people are calling you transphobic. You see how this is set up? And then let me say this again. Mrs. Netta is not saying anything in any of this. Mrs. Netta has gone on about her business. She's gone on about her business. But now all of the backlash is on T.S. Madison. And you're telling me that this wasn't a setup? This was a setup. This was a setup to bring T.S. Madison down. And T.S. Madison took the bait. She took the bait. You're up here, T.S. Madison. Mrs. Netta and Charles are down here. I'm not talking about in terms of being a human. I'm talking in terms of success. You're up here. You've been in blockbuster. You've been in blockbuster movies. Why would you lower yourself down to here? See, if you weren't if the Libra wasn't so much up in the air. See, sometimes you have to pull on your Aries, the fire side of you. You got to pull on that so you can come down to earth just a little bit. Because even though they say Aries is a fire sign, it's really an earth sign. And in case y'all didn't know, but that's another story, child. That's above, some people's pay grade. But I'm not going to get into that. You got to come on down to earth. and maybe even pull on the Capricorn side of you, because Libra sometimes ties into Capricorn as well. You got to come on down to earth to see what's going on with that Gemini. You see what I'm saying? Because sometimes Gemini can morph into Virgo. But see, you so far up in the air talking about ain't nobody gonna replace you, can't nobody replace you. You can be replaced. You can be replaced. And it looks like they found your replacement. And her name is Mrs. Netta. I don't know why people think that they are not replaceable in the industry, in social media. And all of this started because of the person that you chose as your co host. I don't like his energy. See, if you have the discernment, the spirit of discernment, you could see that that man that sits up there with you, he's not for you. That's why he kept talking about Mrs. Netta. You didn't want to talk about Mrs. Netta and Charles. You said that yourself. T.S. Madison said that herself, that she didn't want to talk about Mrs. Netta and Charles. But you allowed this person to pull you into that. And then you kept responding to it. You kept responding to it. If T.S. Madison says that the rooms that she sits in, they're not mentioning Mrs. Netta's name, they're not mentioning Charles' name. If you say that, then why would you allow yourself to be brought down into this muddy pool of mess when you're supposed to be up here? But when you're up here, you're supposed to be up here with a conscience. You're not supposed to be up there and be unconscious. See, you're up there and you're unconscious and you're looking your nose down at people, thinking that you are above reproach, thinking that you cannot be brought down a notch. And that's exactly what they did. And then you further put the nail in your own coffin when you started talking about Tasha K's son. And this is not the first time you've done that. You've been doing that ever since you and Tasha K fell out about the Just Hilarious situation, which I find hilarious because now Tasha K and Just Hilarious are beefing. Everything that Tasha K said in her response, it was justified. It was really justified, and I don't like Tasha K like that. I'm not a Tasha K fan. But she is a mother. And when you talk about a woman's child, and the women who you're talking about, they don't look at you as another woman. They look at you as a man talking about their children. They don't look at you as a woman. They look at you as a man talking about their children. Tasha K calls T.S. Madison a man every day. So even the women that support you, you're kind of alienating them as well because they have children too. Even though you weren't talking about their children personally, they still look at, you know how black women feel about men or people that they look at as men talking about their children? You know how black women feel about that, and then they are your main supporters? You can't do that. And I mean, you can, but you're not going to continue to get the support. T.S. Madison should have never addressed Mrs. Netta. It wasn't that important. So what if somebody saying that Mrs. Netta looked more cunt than you? So what? You know what you look like, and you know what Mrs. Netta looks like. And I ain't judging neither one. But I'm just saying. T.S. Madison made a very big mistake addressing this. And then you allow Tasha K to manipulate you and bait you into responding to her that way. And once again, I'm going to point to something as proof that this was a setup. Mrs. Netta is not saying anything. She laughing all the way to the bank because her name is circulating all through social media. Her name is circulating all through social media. She's laughing all the way to the bank. While T.S. Madison is facing backlash, being called a homophobic, a transphobic person. And while the legacy that you were building for yourself is now being chipped away at by Mrs. Netta. Because you opened up the gateway for it by responding to that nonsense. But who I really thought is that gay guy that you have sitting on your platform. He's not funny. I don't find anything remotely talented about him. You can do your... why did T.S. Madison stop doing the guest appearances? You know what I'm saying? She would bring on different well-known guests like she did Mama D, New York. Even Tasha K was on there at one time when she did her little, Supreme Court or whatever. Why did she stop doing that? Now the show is boring. Your numbers are not even, they're not even the same. I just wish she had worked things out with Kaya because that's where the magic was. Ever since you separated from Kaya, things have been totally bad for you. What happened to the show on We? Was that canceled? What happened to the show on We? The T.S. Madison Experience. I didn't look at it, but I do know that she had a show. Is it canceled? It hasn't been on since for the past couple of years almost. What happened to the show? And this is no shade. This is no shade because I think T.S. Madison has talent. But the problem is T.S. Madison has allowed a lot of this to go to her head. And now you're starting to look your nose down at people and be arrogant and egotistical. You can never get too comfortable in your status and start talking about people's defenseless children. Tasha K's children have nothing to do with this. You could have talked about her mama. You could talk about her. But why would you bring her child into this? That's the only thing I'm saying. Why would you do that? Because now that has made you look like something very, very unfavorable and something very unflattering. I mean, you're already fighting so many other issues and demons. Why would you want to open up this demonic door? And I'm being facetious when I say that. And I'm not again, let me be clear. I'm not a Tasha K fan. I'm not a T.S. Madison fan. I'm not a Mrs. Charles. A Mrs. Netta and Charles. I'm none of that. But I see where T.S. Madison went wrong. You should have never addressed Mrs. Netta. You should have never addressed her. We would not be here if you would have never addressed her. And if you did have to address it, you should have just said, you know what? People can have whatever opinions they want to have as it pertains to me and Mrs. Netta. But I wish Mrs. Netta and Charles nothing but the best. Much success to them. And that's it. That's all you had to say. But now you've opened up a door that I don't think you're going to be able to close. So now you and Tasha K are going back and forth again. And she's saying some very, very intimate, revealing things about you, about T.S. Madison. I'm not talking to T.S. Madison. I'm just saying that. Of course, I'm not talking to T.S. Madison. I'm just saying that because it's easier to address the person that I'm talking to by saying that. That's all. But she's saying some very, very intimate things about you and about your body and things like that. Things that I don't think, that should really be on display. But you started this by talking about her kid. And to her, you are a man to her. She don't look at you as a woman. She's not going to respect you as a woman. And she's very, very open and vocal about that. And remember, she's a Pisces. Pisces are very vindictive, especially female Pisces. They are very, very vindictive. What I think T.S. Madison should do is offer a public apology to Mrs. Netta and Charles. I think she needs to come down off her high horse and say, you know what, I went about this the wrong way, and I want to apologize to my community, to the trans community, and most importantly, Mrs. Netta and Charles. And I also think she needs to apologize to Tasha K for talking about her child. You don't have to apologize to her for the other stuff you said, because she did talk about your mother. I get it. So you know what? You should talk about hers and talk about her. But I think I think she should apologize to Tasha K for the comments that you've made about her son on multiple occasions. Her son was not sitting around talking about you, so why would you talk about that little boy? That's a little boy. I would rather you talk about somebody's dead relative than talk about their child, their living child, because that's like throwing spells and curses at that child. And that's exactly what T.S. Madison was doing. You were throwing spell work at Tasha K's son. And I'm not a fan of Tasha K, but Tasha, you need to take measures spiritually to protect your son. Because the child is innocent. That's why I'm saying that. Because otherwise, I don't care nothing about no Tasha K like that. But she needs to take measures to protect her son spiritually, because this person, T.S. Madison, is throwing spell work and curses at your son. Clear as day. Anyway, the Gwirls are really going at it, and they're showing their tail, child. The Gwirls, they're showing their tail, okay? And I just had to give my own spiritual assessment. Some things are not even worth responding to. And I'm going to say it again. I don't know why T.S. Madison would even address Charles and Mrs. Netta. And that guy, Craig, that you have as your co-host, T.S. Madison really needs to consider getting rid of him. But anyway, that's all I have to say. That's my 2 cents.